We are so excited to be here in Copenhagen. I can't speak for Elsie. Well, this is my first time in Copenhagen. Is this your first time as well?
Also my first time in Copenhagen.
And I have not left the Bella Center, so I am eagerly anticipating this weekend. So let's get this show on the road. I'm first and foremost, I'm Paris.
Hi, and I'm Elsie.
All right. Well, and the clicker doesn't work. And that doesn't work either. Already. Hold on, why is it not working?
Technology is the best, isn't
Yeah,
it?
here we are.
Like, it always acts in super predictable ways.
All right. I think, all right. Yeah, we're good now. Okay.
All right. So first off, we're going to start talking, we'll start off by talking about our charter, which we recently completed. It's based off of the template that the steering committee recently put out, and we would encourage all of the other SIGs to also make a charter. And you can check out our charter through that link, and we'll have our slides posted. What we really called out, and what we think you should also think about calling out, was how to communicate our changes and decisions to the rest of the community. So what we do is we operate through lazy consensus. Lazy consensus is the best consensus. So we start out in the implementation stage, and then we send notes out to the mailing list, our own mailing list for socialization, talk about it, make sure that we internally think that it's a good idea. And then we send it out to, on the broader mailing lists, to the SIG leads and to KDev. And that's kind of our mode of operation. And then we've also created projects.md as a way of keeping our head straight of all of the things that we're supposed to own. And then in the future, we're hoping to use GitHub projects. This is just kind of like our stopgap measure.
Yeah, we definitely had to start somewhere, that's for sure. As you can see in the next coming slides, we work on a lot. I think yesterday in the contributor experience update after we were done, I had a lot of folks come up to me and said, wow, I did not know your SIG worked on this much. And I'm like, well, when you have a community of I think 1,300 at this point. There's a lot of contributors who have a lot of needs. So we have a couple of principles that are actually guiding us this year. I initially called them mottos, but I think these are more principles. And what we're going to do is go through those based off of the sub-projects. We have split up the special interest group into sub-projects, so it's different areas of the community repo that we own through owners files. And first principle is if it's not automated, it better damn well be documented. And that's very important for us because as we grew from one individual, Sarah Novotny, who built the community into many different community managers and also full-time engineers who help us with workflow. We have a lot of people who do smaller tasks or one task, which leads us into like achieving a spoofless SIG. So spoof would in this case would be single point of human failure. For instance, George Castro, who works at Heptio as a full-time community manager, at one point was the only person that could use our YouTube account and do live streaming and things like that. Now we have that cleared up, and now we have multiple players in the community who are working on many different facets of the project. Growing our contributors, you'll also see with the mentoring subproject that it's super important that we grow our contributors, and I'm not just talking about new contributors either. New contributors is just one aspect of that, but we're really talking about moving people through owners files so that we don't have any bottlenecks. And then, of course, that all contributors should have the same experience across the board. And the board in this case would be our many repos. We're talking 60 plus 20 in incubation, plus many others that are related, like the concept of Kubernetes SIGs repos. So the first sub-project that we own that I just mentioned previously is mentoring. So we actually are attacking mentoring in many different ways. One of them is reducing the time burden. I actually have another talk in 2 hours that I'm giving on mentoring. And these are the programs that that are currently in build stage right now. The first one's the one-on-one hour. Very briefly, that's just a concept of one time, one mentor, one mentee, 1 hour. And this reduced that time burden of, oh, you always have to meet with your mentor. And this is actually predetermining goals. So their goals would be for the mentee to say that they want a code-based tour or they want pair programming, and then we match them up accordingly. And then we have group mentoring, which I could talk a whole hour on, but we don't have the time for that. But for group mentoring, that's really playing off the concept of peer mentoring and a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 being 4 mentees to 1 mentor. And we essentially build the foundations of their communication framework. And it's a 3-month program at a self-paced, semi-structured learning environment. Meet Our Contributors is a once-a-month program. Carolyn and Aaron and several others that are actually in the room right now have been on that as mentors. That is a really quick way for people to get mentoring type of conversations, questions addressed. So there's been questions like, what's your favorite color, to how do I become an approver, what are your tips on which SIG should I join, just very rapid kind of questions. Then we have Outreachy and Google Summer of Code, who help us with more of a student type of intern feel. Outreachy is also awesome because they really address the underrepresented in tech issue, and without addressing that in your mentoring programs, then you shouldn't necessarily have a mentoring program. So we think that that's highly critical for us. And then we, of course, have mentoring at events. So at some KubeCons and some other events, we'll do speed networking and speed mentoring. And then, of course, there's the release team. The release team actually has shadow roles built into that, and that's an awesome way to achieve a mentor, because naturally this person that's the first in the role, for instance, like the release lead, Josh Burkus is actually here for this release. Hey, Josh. And so Josh is actually going to be mentoring the shadow role for that. So that's a really cool way to do succession planning. So for this, we actually need mentors. I will, when we upload the slides, I'll actually include the link to the mentee mentor form. So if anybody out here would like to participate in any of these programs, we would love to have you. And then also I'm looking for folks to help us automate with this process. You'll see at my talk later, if you come, that we have a flow chart flowed out, and we're ready to automate a lot of these processes and make it self-service as possible.
So next we're diving into my baby in the project, which is DevStats. So the Linux Foundation graciously hired a contractor, actually, for us to have this large conglomerate dashboard put together. His name is Lucas, and he's done a fabulous job. I'm going to do a soft plug in the next slot of talks. There's an entire talk devoted to this. So if you want more of this, come check that out in the next hour. So if you've been on the weekly community calls, which you should have all have been, because that's a great call, we have done Graph of the Week fairly frequently. And those graphs come from the DevStats dashboard. Currently, there are 46 graphs in the dashboard, and a subset of our SIG has been meeting once a week to work on paring those graphs down and writing detailed descriptions so anybody can quickly look at the graphs and understand what's going on, giving them names that make a little bit more sense, and doing that kind of work. And so we have also recently set up a system for people who would like to make requests for changes or for new dashboards. And so it is a GitHub project in the repository, and I've linked to it right there. And so people can create a card with a thorough description of their request, and that subcommittee will look at it, make sure that it makes sense, And then if it's approved, then we'll go ahead and assign that issue to Lucas, who will go ahead and do that work. And so if you want to get involved in that sub-project, we would love your help. We meet Thursdays at 2:30 Pacific time. And there is a DevStats channel in the Kubernetes Slack that you're also welcome to join. Whoops. There we go. Another of our sub-projects is contributor documentation. And so a major issue for us was discoverability. People would be like, oh, like we don't have any documentation on this. And it's like, actually, we do have documentation on this. It's just living in this nonsensical repository. And so a big project for us was pulling all of that documentation together into one place so people could easily find it. So there wasn't a duplication of effort. And so that is the contributor guide. And George Castro was awesome and spearheaded that project. But we also had several other people work on this, Guinevere and Tim Pepper, as well as many other people. And they're awesome humans for helping us with this. So how you can help us with this is to go in and look at it and see where we missed stuff. PRs are more than welcome. And then especially the reviewer guide section we need help with. It's currently just tips, and so we need help fleshing it out and making it more hardy. And then another upcoming piece of documentation that we're working on is the developer guide, and Ryan Jarvinen is heading that up right now. And we're requesting feedback May 3rd at, do you know if that time is Pacific?
That is, no, 1550, it's military.
No, Pacific time, or like what time, if it's UTC or Pacific.
I don't know.
Okay.
Honestly. Yeah.
We will update the slides with the correct time
on that
one.
The deep dive is tomorrow at, I think, 3:50 our time.
3:50.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
3:50 Copenhagen time.
Yep. All right. Then, of course, we are working on many other different kinds of contributor documentation, just outside of the regular READMEs and things like that that you see that other open source projects have. We're actually going to be separating out a lot of contributor information versus user information. We realize that our community is actually users plus contributors, which we know that can get a little hairy, especially when you're trying to find information, and especially when you're throwing the word developer around. Developer in our case could mean like a Kubernetes developer that's at a company and they're an end user, or it could mean Kubernetes developer and they're actually pushing code upstream and working on like testing infra or something like that. So we're actually planning a new contributor website. This is going to be spun off of the Kubernetes.io and in its own domain. And this will have very contributor-centric information. So it'll have like a SIG updates that are on YouTube. It will have all of our developer guide information, contributor guide information. It'll essentially be a one-stop shop for contributors. We're also toying with the idea of having a Twitter contributor channel and many other contributor-focused communication platforms. We actually have a KEP in process for that, and for folks who don't know what a KEP is, it's the Kubernetes Enhancement Proposal. So we've adopted that as part of our decision-making process, and that KEP is addressing the website, and I'd love to have feedback on that, so feel free to go ahead and comment on that issue. George Castro is actually going to be leading that up. It'll be built on Hugo. And then we've got label documentation. Aaron, who's in the audience, has been working a ton on this. This is really helping us with issue triage and with just overall organization of the project. I left the first bullet up because just wanted to give you an example of some of the conversations that we have in contributor experience. One of which of late is the help wanted issue, especially because we have a lot of new contributors that onboard frequently. And a lot of the feedback that we get is that the help wanted label seems like it is for people who are very experienced with the project, and like a SIG would just need another extra pair of hands that's experienced and not necessarily a good starter issue. We at one point in time had a for new contributors label. Long story short, it's no longer there because folks either weren't using it or weren't using it correctly. So we're trying to work out a plan where we can make that label come alive again, but also come alive with some education behind it for SIG leads and SIG members so that they're using it correctly, so that our new contributors can indeed pick out issues, things like typo fixes, etc., so that they can get their feet wet and get in the door and know how kind of our testing infra works. And comments are appreciated, especially if you're a part of a SIG right now and you're using these labels maybe in a different way than other folks, especially with LGTM, which we'll get into in a second. But that label documentation is extremely critical, I think, for not only new contributors, but current contributors. And then we've got a lot going on with issue hygiene too. If you are a member of our mailing list, you'll see that we have a lot of conversations around issue hygiene and labeling as well. And we've set some guidelines. Sadev, who's in the audience, has done a lot of great work with this. Thanks, Sadev. Take a look at those guidelines, and we've been thinking about adopting those across the org.
Okay, so the next subproject that we're going to talk about is contributor workflow and automation. So our overarching goal for this subproject is for contributors to have the same experience across repositories. So for instance, we want to make sure that LGTM means the same thing across all of the repositories. We're looking to simplify the documentation and process for cherry picks. Sometimes we want to pick a fix back to multiple branches, but the process to do that is complicated and unclear. Shout out to Tim Pepper for documenting the current state of the world, and we're working on further proposals to create automation to make this even easier. We're still working towards creating bot automation to allow contributors to handle tasks that normally would require direct write access to repositories. We're trying to phase out the need for this and to enable more contributors to have the ability to do tasks that would typically need someone from a small trusted group. And then one of the last big pieces for that is editing PR descriptions and release notes. And then
And I can't overemphasize actually the last bullet, which is the feedback piece, because the project is so large that some folks may miss our conversations about LGTM. For instance, I feel like we've been having this conversation for 6 months at this point. However, some people in the org are still are just now hearing about this and come to us and say, why'd you change my workflow, even though we may have already gone through like a lazy consensus process, which is laid out in our charter. So please, if you're a part of a SIG and you feel like you might use some of this workflow that's different than the rest of the org, come to us, tell us about it, or tell us how it could be better if you're experiencing issues, and we'll see what we can do about it. Our next slide, or not slide, our next sub-project is the community management element, and many of you may be familiar with some of the activities that we do here because these are more of our visible projects, if you will. First and foremost is Slack. We don't technically own Slack, CNCF does. However, we own the moderation of it as well as carrying out some of the policies and procedures that we've laid forth. We did recently create a Slack moderation guidelines, so you can see that. But just to give you sort of a sense of how big Slack is, we have 35,000 people on our Slack. I feel like I was in a talk a while ago where somebody said, oh, 6,000 people's in our Slack, and that's so huge. I'm like, whoa. Ours must be gigantic. But it's really cool. We have about four active moderators only for 35,000 people, so that's awesome. And we have about 160, or actually 170, I think, at this point, the last time I looked at the analytics, channels. We don't keep private channels unless they have to do with code of conduct issues or mentoring. So creating very safe environments, but we do not allow for private channels in other ways. Mailing lists, we actually are about to take over the ownership of this, and this has to do with the single point of human failure principle. Right now we have a few veterans, if you will, of the project. First and foremost, Brian Grant, who technically owns a lot of our mailing lists. So Contributor Experience is going to be taking over the ownership of this, which will be very similar to like our Slack administration guidelines. George Castro actually just threw together a moderation catch-all guidelines for us that's going to supersede the Slack guidelines that we put into place so that we can have all of our communication platforms running on the same moderation guidelines. So again, that would be Kubernetes development and Kubernetes users. Those are just the shorthand of those. We also run the weekly community meeting that most of you are probably familiar with. It happens on Thursdays in the morning. These are running pretty smoothly at this point. I think we've got this down to a well-oiled machine, with the exception of we want to make some possible adjustment to the demos. We also participate in roadshows for Contributor Experience specifically. This is our first time that we did it this quarter. The roadshows, we visited SIGs at their meetings and told them kind of what we've been up to, very similar to what this update is about today, and just kind of opening up those doors of communication. Again, going back to that comment that I made about LGTM and how other SIGs may have not heard of the changes. We really want to break down those walls because, again, the project is large and we need to find a way to still communicate, because we are a cross-cutting SIG across the project, across all SIGs. And then I did mention the communication and documentation already. But the discourse, I do want to mention this in this update, is we are looking at other forms of communication, especially other platforms, whether that's to replace Slack, whether that's to replace Google Groups. Who knows at this point, but what we know is that we're going to give Discourse a test run, and we actually have a cap in for that, and George is going through the motions of the cap as well as the test, and the test is going to be a 3-month period on Discourse, and see what kind of activity that we can get there, and to kind of compare and contrast what we currently have already. Was this me or you?
This is you, but that's okay.
Okay. And then we also have events, Hire Here, and these are updates, deep dives, but then you also have Contributor Summit, and then we also have things like speed networking and mentoring that I mentioned earlier in the mentoring slide, but just kind of any event that's geared towards contributors, we probably place at least some part in that, if not full ownership of. And just to kind of give you a really cool data point, yesterday we had about 191, I think that was the exact number, at the Contributor Summit, and Seattle will probably see about 400. There's Chris Nova's cool tweet about us. So what are we looking forward to in the future? Again, the communication platforms, we would like to get a better strategy around this. We know that we're kind of in this inundated state of, oh my gosh, we have too many communication platforms. I mean, I have a list right now going, I think it's about 20 that we all monitor in some sense, whether it's Twitter, Reddit, Slack, like 45 mailing groups or mailing lists. Zoom calls, which are our weekly updates. I mean, you name it, we are probably on it, and that is, if that's kind of crazy for us as chairs and leads and members of this SIG, that's most likely crazy for the rest of our community. So we're going to be really looking to iron those things out at some point. And then, of course, we're going to be looking to scale the new contributors workshop that we had yesterday. Thank you to Josh and Gwyn, who are in the audience, for running that awesome session, where we trained about 50 new contributors on how to contribute to our environment. So we're thinking about how we can possibly get that information out and disseminate that in the best way possible. Thinking about like meetups and other ways that we can scale that in a very self-service manner so that they can have playgrounds to play within our testing infra. Our testing infra is very state-of-the-art, so it's cool that people can actually get in contact with it at a lower level and not necessarily be judged by making mistakes on a quote for real PR. Next, by the next KubeCon, I really hope to have all of those mentoring programs completely implemented. Half of them are already, but going on a mentoring drive and really just getting some data around what works and what doesn't. And then, of course, complete mentoring, complete contributor documentation. So this may include videos. We've got this concept going around right now about doing contributor videos, kind of like the Just for Funk, if anybody's familiar with Golang, and taking that one step farther. But as Elsie mentioned earlier with the developer guide and the complete contributor guide, we should be pretty much set there. So get involved. We need all the help we can get. We actually have a very active SIG. I'd say roughly 15 active contributors, about 200 folks who will either weigh in, chime in some fashion. Here's our many different ways to reach out to us. Send me a pigeon at Google, I'll find it, and try out a help wanted issue. We're also in the process too of taking in our own medicine of what we're trying to dish out with help wanted as well. So feel free to give that a spin. Any questions? Carolyn.
So when I came on, I actually never started contributing to the main upstream repo, and I kind of just found my way through a SIG. And I noticed that the way the SIG runs itself versus all of the things I hear about here seem like wildly different. Are the SIGs supposed to try to follow what you're doing, or are they just supposed to look up every 6 months and realize they've drifted? Or?
Yeah, no, I mean that's the exact issue that we're trying to tackle now, and that's why we've been trying to do like the road shows and things like that. We're really trying hard to make it so that the contributor has a very similar experience. We know in some cases that it's not going to be the exact experience for whatever technology reason insert here, but we're working on that. And that use case right there is exactly what drives us to do that, because we want you to contribute to other facets of the project. But definitely, maybe we can talk offline about some of the ways that it's extremely different, and then work with your SIG and in getting engaged in helping to make that smoother of a process.
Thanks, that was great.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yes, similar thing.
Yep.
I came in I spot the book and I submitted PR and I now have the contributor tag and yay, I can talk and get that little flag, but it's like I didn't come in for the SIG and I've just okay, I've come to this talk because they're more interested in what's going on.
Yep. Yep.
As a techie, I just come in, commit some code, took it off the wall, it got accepted, great.
That's actually a rare story. I'm not gonna lie, that's rare. Aaron, you agree?
It is, and I'm sad that it's rare.
Yeah, that's rare.
Please answer.
Yeah, no, it's rare because usually you need like a SIG label to even get attention on your PR, and that's what the label definitions that Aaron's talking about. That's why he's getting so passionate right now. And we hear from many, many new contributors that their PRs never get looked at, and that's because they're not necessarily contacting the right people or knowing the right avenues. So you clearly hit a sweet spot. Your code is A+.
Just bullshit on Slack.
Yeah, that too. But yeah, you knew you may have already been in open source enough to kind of know who to target exactly. And a lot of our contributors that I've encountered, this would be their first time contributing to open source, period. So, and then they're coming into our large, huge testing infra environment that's very different than ours, or than most. So that's another kind of hurdle that they have to get over. So, one, congrats on that PR acceptance, and number two, I hear that, I have heard that sometimes, and like the same answer with Carolyn, like we want to make that part better. So, and that's what we're here for, from our special interest group side. Anyone else? You're going to be a mentor. No, what is it?
No, I was curious about the help wanted labels and the good first PR, because we do that on service catalog.
Yep.
But what I find is that it feels very ad hoc at the moment. Someone asks to meet the contributors or something, and like I've been vocal, so I'm starting to get lots of newbies, and I love them. Just, yeah, great, contribute to service catalog, please. But it feels like there isn't like an entry point for them to find the labels across all the various repos that are associated with Kubernetes. Is that something you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, the label definitions, like if you click on the help on it, or if you know, the future home of like for new contributors, you'll be able to see like all of the issues that would have.
Can you see them across the repos? Because like SIG service catalog or the incubators
Yes.
are kind of off on their own.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And this also has to do with education as well. So, but the more people like yourself that can help us push these communications, the better. Because right now, all we're seeing is the people of contributor experience that are pushing these in SIGs, and not necessarily the SIG members themselves. So we really need to change that narrative. It would be really helpful if we had almost contributor experience advocates in every SIG that we have, and to give folks, yes, please, yes. Yes, we even have claps back there from Gwen. And it's important that we figure out a way to communicate better within this environment. And I think the only way to do that is through advocacy, because it works. And it's really the only way we're going to get our message across. Just because, again, you know how many PRs and issues and emails and alerts and Slack messages and stuff you get just from a service catalog perspective, not even necessarily from like the holistic project perspective. So we're really trying hard, like I said, to have these road shows on at least a quarterly basis, to let folks know like what's available to them from a SIG perspective. All right, I think we're done. My time? All right. Well, you can meet me in the hallway. I will gladly rant and chat your ear off about contributor experience anytime or any day. Again, I'm Paris. Feel free to reach out on Slack. That's my ID.
And I'm May on Slack, and the same. Totally reach out.
All right. Thank you, everybody.